Alrighty folks, and welcome to the Conical Podcast channel. Episode 28, the Dragon Boat Festival Special, or the Duanwu Special. Like I said in my podcast last week, in China we were celebrating the Dragon Boat Festival. So this week, I thought it would be a good idea to talk of the legend behind the Dragon Boat Festival and where it comes from. After all, it is celebrated today, and this legend happened thousands of years ago. So this week, we are moving away from our narrative story, again, and are focusing on something that happened way before the end of the Western Han Dynasty. We're going back to the Warring States period, or Jianguo Shiji. So if you don't know what the Warring States period is, then I suggest you head back to episode 15, where I dedicate an entire episode to the Warring States. It would probably also be worth your while to look at the spring and autumn period while you're there, or Chunqiu. Now I do want to mention, before moving forward here, that the Dragon Boat Festival has many legends behind it. So the story that I'm about to tell you isn't the only one. There are plenty of other ones around. However, this one is the one that my students in school tell me about all the time, and it's the one that seems to get the most recognition today. Now I'll get into my theory as to why that is pretty shortly, but for now, let's hop into our time machine and head on back to the Warring States period, where the legend for the Dragon Boat Festival begins, with a man named Qu Yuan. Qu Yuan was born at around 340 BC in what is modern-day Hebei province. You all know where Hebei province is by now. Think of COVID's starting point. But anyway, he was born to a noble family in the state of Chu. With the right background, Qu Yuan excelled at his scholarly ways and soon became a high-ranking government minister for his intelligence. Qu Yuan was an incredibly stubborn man who championed political loyalty to one's sovereign and to keep independence, in particular as the state of Qin was growing increasingly more powerful. Qu Yuan, to counter this threat, advised King Chu to form alliances with the other states, as it was clear it was needed in order to survive the state of Qin's armies. However, jealous ministers and scholars of Qu Yuan managed to turn the king against him, and he was exiled. During his time in exile, Qu Yuan would write poems dedicated to the love of his country and also of romance. Qu Yuan is known as one of the greatest poets ever in Chinese literature, as he even made up his own style of poetry. Now normally, Chinese poetry follows a 4-character line structure, so in one line the poem is 4 characters, and the last character usually is a play on the tones from the last character in the last line. Think of it in the sense that we make our poems to rhyme. That's the idea anyway. But what Qu Yuan did was different. He didn't stick to just 4 characters in a line, but wrote as many as he wanted to tell his story. This style became known as Sao. It has influenced many poets in the future, particularly in the Tang Dynasty. Now amazingly, Qu Yuan's poems pretty much all survived. Well, the famous ones anyway. And you can still read them today in a book called Chu, which roughly translated is Chu Poems, or Poems of the South. Nothing fancy, but it's simple and effective. The Chu is a book of not only Qu Yuan's poems, but other poets from the era as well, like Song Yu. So like I said, Qu Yuan, during his time in exile, wrote all of these poems, and spoke of the wonders of his country, which was Chu. There wasn't a unified China yet, and as time passed by, he became increasingly alarmed with what was going on elsewhere. It is said that in times of depression, Qu Yuan would go to visit a well, where he would stare at his miserable expression and sigh. This well, apparently, you can still see today in Hebei province, and it's called the Face Reflection Well. Finally, the Qin juggernaut had made its move, and it was only a matter of time before the last state, his state, was going to meet its end. By 278 BC, the Chu king had been captured, and their capital Yin had also been captured by the Qing general Bai Qi. Upon hearing the news, Qu Yuan, in his depressed state, wrote his final poem titled Lament for Yin. Upon completion, Qu Yuan wandered over to the Loa river, tied a rock to his body and threw himself into the river. This was his last defiance to the Qin. He said he would rather die than submit to a foreign ruler, especially those tyrants of the Qin, and with that, he died. The local people, when seeing this, tried frantically to find his body, but couldn't find him. So to stop fish and evil spirits from eating him or taking him away, they frantically threw rice into the river in an attempt to save him. They beat drums around the river as loud as they could, and they splashed their paddles into the water to ward them all away. However, a few days later, Qu Yuan's spirit did appear over the river, and he said that he didn't die because of fish or through drowning, but because of a river dragon. Qu Yuan told the people who saw him to stop throwing rice into the river, but instead to wrap their rice into triangular patches of silk as an offering to the dragon. That was on the 5th day of the 5th month within the lunar calendar, and from that day onwards, the people around the river would throw their rice patches wrapped in silk into the Loa river to honour Qu Yuan's unwavering loyalty and patriotism, but also to honour the dragon within the river. And that, my friends, is the end of the story, and how the Dragon Boat Festival came into being. Nowadays, Qu Yuan is probably the most famous poet in China, as China right now is feeling very patriotic. So naturally, the government encourages students in schools to recite at least one of his poems. It's like back in Scotland, we get a Rabbie Burns Day, where everyone eats haggis, neeps and taties and recites the poems of Robert Burns over a whiskey. The Duanwu Festival is similar to that. People remember Qu Yuan's loyalty to his state and eat zongzi. Zongzi is the adaptation of the rice and silk patches. Nowadays, it's sticky rice wrapped in reed leaves. The rice is also filled with either beans or dates, or with meat. I'm not going to lie, I think they taste pretty good. So I'm not going to complain about eating them at least once a year. As well as this, the Dragon Boat's festival name suggests some other aspects to the festival. And you are right. People decorate their boats with dragons, obviously, and participate in races along the Yangtze, Loa, Pearl and many more rivers. The Dragon Boat Festival tends to happen between May and June, and it has been tradition in China for over 2,000 years now, and it will likely never stop. So there you have it. There is the end of the story that's basically lots of people recite over the Dragon Boat Festival. Now, like I said previously, there are lots of other stories as well. Like, for example, the conquests of the state of Wu during the spring and autumn period yet again. So there are lots of different stories that come with the Dragon Boat Festival. And what I might do is next year, when the next Dragon Boat Festival comes along, I'll tell another story. So, I hope you've enjoyed that. And next week, we will get back into our narrative and chronological podcast, which will be the Eastern Han Dynasty and its collapse. So I hope you're looking forward to that, and I'll see you on the next episode. Thanks for listening.